Hello and welcome to this analysis of Act 5, Scene 1. We're almost at the end of the play, just a couple of scenes left to go. You know what to do by now in terms of note-taking, so let's get started. So where are we in the play then? Well, we've seen in the exposition of the play that Shakespeare has established a background of racism against which Othello's character is presented, and that first act of the play really helps us to understand the decisions that Othello makes later in the play. So it's really important for Act 5 to understand that in the opening couple of scenes, Shakespeare presents Iago as being extremely racist towards Othello, but not just Iago as well. That racism is found throughout Roderigo's speech, throughout the kind of things that Brabantio says as well. Through the rising action, the chaos in the play has increased, and Iago has started to position people into place so that he can fulfill his plan. So we see Cassio and Desdemona speaking alone, and then Cassio starts to show Othello that Desdemona is having an affair with Cassio, which of course we know isn't true. We have the whole business with the handkerchief towards the climax of the play, where the handkerchief is used by Iago as evidence of Cassio and Desdemona's affair, and he uses this handkerchief to start to drive Othello mad. In the falling action of the play, Othello becomes increasingly corrupt. Iago's lust for power increases dramatically. We see Othello verbally abusing Desdemona, who has become very different to the determined, self-possessed character of Act 1. We have also seen in Act 4, Scene 3, the Willow scene, the last scene that we did. We see Desdemona preparing for bed whilst discussing woman's infidelity with Emilia. And really, as Desdemona's power and confidence decreases, we've seen Emilia presented as increasingly vocal and outspoken about rights for women. And we're really here towards the denouement of the play, where the debasement of previously honourable emotions is irreversible. So Othello's deep, passionate love for Desdemona, which almost transcends all the limitations of human existence, so their love seems to transcend the racism of society, that is now debased. Othello is using very physical, animalistic language to talk about his love for Desdemona, or his lack of love for Desdemona. And we also see that other characters towards the end of the play proceed to attempt to restore order and justice. Okay, so what actually happens in Act 5, Scene 1 then? Well, first of all, Iago shows Roderigo where to stand so that he can stab Cassio, and Iago assures Roderigo that he will be nearby. Roderigo seems a bit unsure, but he agrees to go through with the deed. And that phrase, the deed, will be familiar to us from Macbeth, where Macbeth speaks euphemistically about killing Duncan because he can't bring himself to admit to the horror that he is going to wreak on the body of his friend, his kinsman, and his king. And so when Roderigo says the deed, we understand that, like Macbeth, he also cannot admit to what he's going to do. Now, it's interesting that Iago actually doesn't want or plan to stab Cassio himself. Surely that would be the easier method. And we know from the start of the play that Iago prides himself as being good on the battlefield. But it seems that here he'd rather watch others commit the crimes for him. Then Cassio appears on stage and Roderigo makes to stab him, but it's actually Cassio who wounds his assailant. Iago then wounds Cassio in the leg and exits. This scene is set in darkness, so nobody sees Iago's interference, and all people can hear are the cries of Cassio and Roderigo, and then that little glimmer of Iago moving on stage. Othello hears these cries and he determines that Iago is upholding his part of the bargain. So now he's completely convinced of Iago's loyalty. He's convinced that Iago is arranging for Cassio to be killed. Othello then leaves to murder Desdemona, and it seems like the violence and the chaos of this scene spurs Othello on in his plans. So this chaos is very reminiscent of Act 2, Scene 3, except it's become much more sinister and much more oppressive. And that chaos reigns on stage as others arrive, including Bianca, who's looking for Cassio. In the darkness, Iago stabs Roderigo, and then as people come on stage and bring lights on, Iago accuses Bianca of being involved in a plot to murder Cassio. Roderigo's body is then discovered. Emilia enters at this point, and Iago asks her to go and tell Othello and Desdemona what has happened. So is this then the fulfilment of Iago's plan, everything that he's been looking forward to since the end of Act 1? Well, at the start of the scene, Iago is presented as very confidently stage managing Roderigo, and he's the instigator of carefully controlled chaos. We see at the start, Iago says, "Quick, quick, fear nothing, I'll be at thy elbow." And his use of imperative verbs, as in fear, shows that he's the one in control of this scene. And he promises Roderigo that he's going to support him, he's going to be by his side in this plan. At this point, Shakespeare draws attention to Iago's arrogance and his self-assuredness. So, as an aside to the audience, Iago says, "I have rubbed this young quat almost to the sense, and he grows angry." So a quat means pimple, so it's very derogatory towards Roderigo. And we've, as an audience, known throughout the play that Iago is manipulating, he's exploiting Roderigo's loyalty and Roderigo's desire for Desdemona. But here it is 100% clear that Iago views Roderigo as very unimportant in the scheme of things. He is simply a pawn in a much greater plan. The word quat is also quite disgusting, which shows Iago's almost hatred towards other people, his sense that he's much better than them. Okay, and then as the scene progresses, Iago's forced to improvise. So he intervenes covertly in wounding Cassio and killing Roderigo. So things seem to be going wrong for him here, and whilst Iago doesn't want to commit any violent acts himself, he's forced to make sure that the plan can come together. Yet this brutally ruthless and very clinical murder is only designed as the preamble to Othello's killing of Desdemona. It is interesting just how emotionless Iago is about killing other people, and perhaps this is something that he's picked up from the battlefield, from the hyper-masculine society in which he lives. And the end of the scene sees Iago reasserting his dominance as he commands a willing Emilia to take news to Othello. Interesting here that Emilia is still following Iago's instructions. We've seen in the Willow scene that she very much allies herself with Desdemona, that she tries to encourage her mistress, and that she tries to cheer her mistress up when she's in a very difficult situation in her marriage. But at the same time, it's very, very clear to us that Emilia hasn't realised what Iago is doing, and that in a sense she still trusts her husband. And Iago says in the scene, "Oh, treacherous villains, what are you there? Come in and give some help." So we see his Janus-faced attitude here, the fact that he's dissembling, he's pretending to be honest and loyal, whilst actually he's deceiving other people. I know treacherous villains is very ironic because, of course, Iago is a treacherous villain, but here he's calling Roderigo perhaps a villain, and then he calls for help, just as he did when Othello had the epileptic fit and Cassio came in. Iago pretended that he was trying to help him. So whilst Iago manages to achieve his desired outcome, it's notable he has to do this by becoming much more personally involved than he had planned. And so for the audience, this is a signal that his absolute control is starting to unravel. Despite this, Iago's final lines in the scene are exultant. So Iago says, "This is the night that either makes me or fordoes me quite." The full rhyme here seems very certain, very settled, and it reminds us of some of the lines that Iago has earlier in the play when he talks about bringing hell and night into the world. And the actual line here means that on this particular night, it's either going to make him, so it's going to bring him success, or it will foredoo him, so it will destroy him. But Iago, I suppose, seems quite confident that this is the night that's going to make him, succeed in his plan. So a lot of exam questions are to do with Iago's motivations in the play, and there's a huge amount of debate about this. And if you can engage with this debate in your essay answers, then that'll really boost your marks. So the main quotation, the main critic that people quote is Coleridge, who talked about Iago's motiveless malignity. So Coleridge's idea is that Iago has no real reason really for what he does. He's just naturally an evil character. And at times in this scene we see Iago being spurred on by an aesthetic delight in suffering. We see that elsewhere in the play. Iago seems to enjoy, for example, Othello's epileptic fit in Act 4. So he stands over Othello and he's almost mocking him as he lies there in this fit. There is, however, another side to the argument. So you could argue that Iago actually can't bear to see goodness and happiness. His hatred for humanity is such that he wants to destroy everything good in the world. So in Act 5, Scene 1, Iago says, "If Cassio do remain, he hath a daily beauty in his life that makes me ugly." So Cassio's life is so good, so moral, so perfect, that it makes Iago ugly. It makes him angry with Cassio. Another motive, perhaps, is that Iago is jealous and he wants to take revenge for Emilia's infidelity with Othello. And Iago, a couple of times towards the start of the play, makes it very clear that he believes that Othello has had an affair with his wife. So Iago says, "It is thought abroad he hath done my office." Now, I suppose I've just said that Iago definitely believes in this affair. Maybe he does and maybe he doesn't, but perhaps we could look at it a different way. At the start of this quotation, Iago says it's thought abroad that Othello has had an affair with Emilia. So perhaps actually what's motivating Iago is society's belief, other people's belief that this affair has taken place. So maybe it doesn't actually matter for Iago whether it does or not. The fact is that other people seem to think that he's unable to keep his wife, that he's been betrayed by his wife in some way. But in Act 4, Emilia implies that this relationship never took place and that Iago's jealousy is completely unfounded. So Emilia talks about a villain that made Iago, suspect me with the more, which tells us that this argument between Emilia and Iago has been going on for quite some time, and that Emilia has faced Iago's jealousy in the home, which is perhaps what makes her so quick to realise that Othello is jealous, and how to be able to tell Desdemona how she should deal with that. But Emilia, although she doesn't say one way or the other here, the implication really is that she hasn't had an affair with Othello. So this idea of Iago being motivated because of Emilia's infidelity, it's something that you can discuss in your essays, but I would suggest that perhaps it hasn't actually happened in the world of the play. Another motivation could be that Iago is prompted on by practical reasons. So he wants to progress in the social hierarchy and he's going to clinically remove all barriers to that. It's almost like he wants to re-establish some sense of fairness in a meritocracy. By meritocracy, I mean a society in which people are promoted because of their achievements, because of their abilities, not because of their kind of inheritance or their family or anything like that. And at the start of the play, we've seen that Othello does live in a meritocratic society, that he has been promoted because of his abilities. And Iago thinks that actually, in a fair and just world, should happen to him as well. Iago in Act 1, Scene 1 says, "I know my price, I am worth no worse a place." Iago seems to say, you know, he's done the state some service, just as Othello has, and he should be promoted too. And he's very angry and very annoyed that Cassio is being promoted above him, that actually, whilst Othello has benefited from the meritocracy, Othello is then going to, I suppose, to change that and promote Cassio just because of, you know, who he knows and what his background is. So possibly Iago wants to restore fairness in this society and make sure that he's promoted above you. In this scene, we also see a moment of realisation for Roderigo. So when Iago stabs him, Roderigo says, "Oh, damned Iago, oh, inhuman dog." And he's perhaps the first character to realise in the play just how black Iago's heart really is. So these O's at the start of each phrase are referred to as apostrophes, so it's an exclamation of some great emotion, and here that emotion would be horror. The adjective damned suggests that Roderigo wants to damn Iago to hell. He wants him to experience the worst punishment that people within a Christian society would be able to imagine. And then the second phrase, inhuman dog, links back to the animalistic language of Act 1. And it seems that here Roderigo has realised that actually it's not Othello who's animalistic, it's actually Iago who has these qualities, who is barbaric, who lives a life of chaos and has a debased attitude to the world. Another question we might ask about this scene is, why does Bianca reappear here? Her presence in the play is perhaps a little bit unsettling. Sometimes it seems as if she's just there purely so that she can have the handkerchief in her hand. However, it seems unusual. It would seem strange to me that Shakespeare would have a character who just is to provide that one little element of function within the plot. Actually, I would argue that Bianca's central to what Shakespeare's trying to do in the play, what he's trying to say about society and the patriarchy. And in this scene, it seems that despite her employment as a prostitute, Bianca's pure devotion to Cassio, which is indicated by her name, echoes Desdemona's for Othello. So therefore, her appearance in this scene and the abuse she receives from others reminds us of the fate that Desdemona is going to face at the hands of the tragic hero. So like Desdemona, Bianca is silenced and ignored in Act 5, Scene 1. So Bianca isn't so much a character foil for Desdemona as maybe a parallel character who's from a very different social class, has a very different experience of life in general, a much less privileged experience of life. However, Bianca undergoes many of the same difficulties as Desdemona does. Iago, for example, in Act 5, Scene 1, calls her a notable strumpet, and of course we remember from Act 4 that Othello uses the word strumpet to talk about Desdemona, so Shakespeare's clearly drawing a parallel there between these two characters. Iago also says, I do suspect this trash to be party in this injury, as in I do suspect this prostitute, this commoner, this kind of person on the margins of society to be part of Cassio's injury, to be part of a plot to murder Cassio. So in one sense, perhaps Bianca's just on stage so that Iago can try and push the blame on someone else. On the other hand, perhaps she's there because Shakespeare wants to show that it's at all levels of society that women are mistreated, are silenced, are abused in this Phoenician Cypriot world. Emilia also uses this kind of language towards Bianca, which might be a little bit surprising. Emilia says, "Oh, fie upon thee, strumpet." So here she believes what Iago says, that Bianca has been part of the plot to attempt to murder Cassio. And Emilia yells abuse at Bianca as well and calls her a strumpet as well. So it seems again that Emilia's transformation in the play isn't complete. She hasn't fully realised what Iago's done. Here Bianca's appearance is bookended by Act 4, Scene 3 and Act 5, Scene 2. So both of those scenes are set in the bedroom, and both of them expose the brutal and unfair treatment of women within a rigid patriarchy. So whilst one might assume that Bianca's position on the chaotic streets of Cyprus is more precarious than Desdemona's, Shakespeare reveals that actually there's more danger within the confines of the house. So yes, these characters are paralleled. Yes, Bianca and Desdemona's experience is very similar, but actually perhaps Bianca is in a safer position than Desdemona, who should be the one who would be being looked after by her husband. However, she is the one who dies at the end of the play. Perhaps the fact that Bianca is the only woman to survive the play indicates that women must adapt and ignore society's expectations, that they have to look out for themselves rather than trusting to the men in their lives to look after them.